You guys know when you're like, yeah, man, I want to look different. You look in the mirror and like, damn it, I look the same as last year. Most people hit slower growth, notably slower growth, roughly around 5 years into real serious training and diet. It's just a slower slope of gains, but gains nonetheless. And slow gains over a long time add up to really, really intense gain. Someone who tells you they're at their natty limit, and then you go to college, you go to grad school, you come back to the same gym, visiting after you already have your career and you live in a different city, and you see him in the gym and he's 12 pounds more muscle at the same body fat, you're going to be like, holy shit. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, you really can do that naturally. Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for RP Strength, and I have a question for you. Have you hit your natty peak yet? But how do you know? Turns out there are ways to know if you've hit your natural peak or close. But first, what the hell is a natural peak anyway? Sounds like an adult film title. Anyone? No one? You gotta get sort of creative in there. The natty peak, aka the natural peak, is roughly close to the amount of muscle that you can hold on your body with a lifetime of training before it. But that training is without drug enhancement. How much muscle can you gain if you really full send it for a very long time without using drugs? Something like Eric Helms, for example, as just something that comes to mind. When Eric Helms has a lot of trouble gaining muscle and he's kind of just about the same size every year, he's more or less hit his natty peak. We'll talk about in very specific ways why Eric Helms is actually an excellent example of that, because he's really trying. We'll talk about what that means in a second. And it doesn't, we're not trying to say like 199 pounds is my natty peak. It's plus or minus 5 pounds. But knowing that if you're close to your natty peak, and we'll have a checklist for you to make sure that you know how you can tell if you're there, expecting more than 5 pounds of muscle drug-free to be gained after you hit it doesn't add up. And so it's good to know if you're close to your natty peak, because it can really change how you approach training. And it's not all bad stuff. And I've got all sorts of great tips for you at the end of, if you really are close to your natty peak, what are some options you can do with your training that doesn't mean you just like quit lifting and become sad again? And my contention is this: most people can get close to their natty peaks within about 10 to 15 years of good effort training and diet. I myself didn't start to use performance enhancing drugs until I was about 13 years into my training career. So I was very close to the natty peak myself, which is kind of cool. And then I had another peak, drug peak, which I hit like last year. And maybe we can hit some more peaks in the future unless I die from overdoing steroids for so long. Okay. Here's the thing. A lot of people get their natty peak estimate wrong because they're conflating an actual natty peak for the beginning of an early asymptote. An asymptote is a curve on a graph that gets really close and closer and closer and closer and closer to a straight line on the graph, but never quite gets there. The way that muscle gain occurs is that at first you gain a crap load of muscle really fast. And then at some point the curve clearly starts to bend and you hit the asymptotic part of the curve. And a lot of people assume that that asymptote is like, okay, after I've gained the first whatever amount of muscle, then I'm pretty close to my natty peak. That's not true, because if we look at where this steep curve ends and the shallow curve asymptote starts, it turns out that asymptote runs for a real long time. And the margin you can gain during that slow curve is actually really big and can meaningfully put a lot of muscle on your body. So this huge trajectory of growth occurs usually in the first 5 years of training for most people. And most people hit slower growth, notably slower growth, roughly around 5 years into real serious training and diet. And a lot of times they think, well, I'm really close to my natty limit. And you'll actually see stuff like that online of people being like, you hit your natty limit in 5 years. For many people, though not all, some do really hit their natty limit within that time, you're just not at your natty limit then. For most people, you're not. It's just a slower slope of gains, but gains nonetheless. And slow gains over a long time add up to really, really intense gain. And it's going to take probably another 5 to 10, more like 10 years after the first 5 for you to settle out into roughly a peak, just a little bit plus or minus more muscle to gain. But during that time, after year 5 and before year 15, you may be able to gain like 10 to 15 pounds more muscle after your first 5 years of gaining a crap load of muscle. And that is a big deal. Someone who tells you they're at their natty limit, and then you go to college, you go to grad school, you come back to the same gym, visiting after you already have your career and you live in a different city, and you see him in the gym and he's 12 pounds more muscle at the same body fat, you're going to be like, holy shit, Matt, it is good to see you, bro. He's like, get in here, brother. Fucking shake it out, bro. How's life, man? I used to remember you were a bitch ass little kid. Now look at you and shit. And you're like, shit. But, what pharmacy are you accessing your gear from? Because you're jacked, bro. 12 more pounds of muscle. Are you kidding me? And it turns out Matt just kind of pulled the trigger early on saying he hit his peak, because that was after year 5. 10 more years later, he gained 12 pounds of muscle. And all of a sudden it's like, you really can do that naturally. You don't need steroids to gain that much. And it's just not true that as soon as the gaining gets hard and you gain way less per year than you used to, that the gains have come to an end. It's just not true. So do not mistake the dropout of amazing noob gains for that's it, that's my natty limit. Noob gains are stage 1. Slow, consistent gains are stage 2. Stage 3 is close to natty limit. Don't skip stage 2, because if you think, newbie gains are over, that's it, that's as big as I'm going to get, it's just not the case. I've seen this play out way too much not to mention, and I'll give more specific examples and a little bit of how it plays out, in fact. So, how do you extrapolate from this early asymptote to your peak? First thing, don't even bother assuming that you're at your peak within 5 years of good effort. And I'll define what good effort means in just a little bit. So if you've been training for 3 years and you're like, man, I think I hit my natty peak, you're almost certainly incorrect. There's a small chance, a very, very small chance that that's true, but it's very, very, very unlikely. So if you've been training less than 5 years very diligently, then just don't even bother with natty peak stuff. If in 5 to 10 years, you are gaining a certain amount of muscle per year, so getting close to that 10 to 15 years total, another way to see it is you can even start to count at 5. Right after 5 years, let's say you're gaining XYZ muscle per year after those years, after year 5. You can assume 2 things. This is really good for setting a realistic expectation for yourself. The rate of kind of year 6, 7, and 8 is unlikely to be beaten, at least by much, and probably not at all, by later years. So if you're gaining like 3 pounds of muscle a year in year 6, it's probably not a way that in year 8, short of using some special sports supplements, that you're going to gain like 7 pounds in that year. And it's also fine to assume that in another few years, another 2 or 3 years, you'll be gaining somewhere between that rate that you were at like year 6, but probably more like half of that rate and possibly close to 0. So let's say something like half of the rate is a good estimate, and even close to 0 sometimes is a better estimate, especially get out to like 15 years. So what's an example of that? Let's say you gained 3 pounds of muscle per year on average in year 6, 7, and 8 on average. And that means you can probably assume pretty safely that year 9, 10, and 11 will get you somewhere between an average of about 1.5 pounds of muscle per year and maybe even 0 pounds of muscle per year. That is how that asymptote hits. So for a while, it's slow gains, and then they get slower, and then they get slower, and somewhere between slow and 0. Big one is that once you're gaining less than about 1 to 2 pounds per year, certainly less than 1 pound per year of muscle, you can theoretically add probably another 5 pounds of muscle from that point when you first start detecting you're gaining substantially less than 2 pounds of muscle a year, and probably not much more than that in your natural career. So another way to say it is this. If you're gaining 1 or 2 pounds of muscle per year now for a few years, and closer to 1 than to 2, and you've been training a long time, you're doing all the right stuff, I'll tell you what the right stuff is in a second, that whatever you weigh now, muscularly wise, how much muscle you have, you can be like, okay, it's probably going to increase by up to 5 pounds more, but not much, which means you have an estimate of what your natty peak might actually look like. Notice it takes like 10 years to even get a good estimate, but once you're there, you can get a pretty decent estimate. If you're still gaining 3 or 4 pounds per year, don't estimate anything, just keep going. But when it gets to about 1 pound per year or so, yeah, 5 more pounds of muscle is probably the most you can hope to gain in most cases. That's just reality. And the ultimate sign that you're close to your natty peak is that after around 10 years of good effort, 10 plus, you're gaining less than about 1 pound or 2 of muscle per year, multiple years in a row. If that's the case, you're probably within 5 pounds or so of your natty peak. Not always, but most of the time. A bonus way to tell that adds some extra information is that your strength for reps in sets of 5 to 30 reps on most of the core exercises is going up very slowly. Like last year, you benched 245 pounds for a set of 5. And then this year you benched, 255 for a set of 5, but it wasn't like 275 and maybe it was just 250, right? 5 or 10 pounds per year increase on the fundamental exercises from a variety of muscle groups means that not only is it, DEXA scans and stuff showing that you're not really gaining a whole lot of muscle, but also your exercises look like they're not getting a ton stronger, sometimes not at all. And it's like, well, there's really no mystery. You know what I mean? It's like, coming over to someone's house who never had a TV and be like, someone stole your TV. Where did the TV go? They're like, well, it wasn't really here to begin with. So it's not really a mystery why it's gone. Just the same way, if your exercises are like skyrocketing in strength and it's coming from somewhere, maybe the DEXA was wrong. But if you're getting body composition assessment, visually you look sort of kind of, you guys know when you're like, yeah, man, I want to look different. You look in the mirror and like, damn it, I look the same as last year. You see some old pics and you're like, I think it was jacked in those pics, even more than now. But then you see some other pics, you're like, maybe it's close. Maybe now I'm a little bit more jacked. And then also your exercises aren't like just outlandishly higher or even notably higher. Yeah, man, that means natty peak is very, very close. Now, this whole time I've been teasing you guys when saying all this has to happen, that whole 5-year beginner thing, then the next 10 years of potentially really good gains. You have to do training that is good enough effort. What do I mean by that? I have 8 check marks for you to hit to know that you're really doing the thing. And I'm going to be very specific. Here's what good effort is. 1, good effort is training between your minimum effective volume and your maximum recoverable volume per system, your whole body, and regularly approaching systemic maximum recoverable volume, often by scaling to 5 or more weekly training sessions on average, each one of those being 1 to 1.5 hours long each and tough. What are some examples in which that does not apply? If someone's like, yeah, man, been doing like 4 sets of squats a week and just my legs won't grow anymore. Bro, that might be at your maintenance volume now. Minimum effective volume in many muscle groups is a discussion for something like 5 sets per week per muscle, and maximum recoverable in the system constraint where you're training everything hard at the same time as 20 to 25 in many cases sets per week. Maximum recoverable in a specialization program where you lower some of the other muscle volumes to maintenance, you crank up some muscles that recover faster. It's 30 or 40 or more sets per week on some occasions, especially if you scale up to it. So if someone's just really, really, really like just training a few times a week, maybe training twice a week or 3 times a week, 45 minutes at a time, and they're doing a few sets, maybe 4 or 5 sets per muscle per week, and like, yeah, man, I think I hit my natty limit. It's truly your natty limit training this easy, but it's really not your natty limit if you get everything right, not even close. On the other side, notice I said minimum effective volume to maximum recoverable. If you are overtraining like crazy, you're sore all the time, you're tired all the time, you get weaker, you get sick all the time, you're overdoing it, which a lot of people on the internet, if you ever make fun of low volume folks, Mike Mentzer people, don't do that. They get really testy and they'll get in the comments and be like, when I lowered my volume, I got the gains of my life. And they're not wrong, because a lot of those folks just way overdoing it, just chronically going way above MRV, just basically staying the same size. And the body's like, I'm just trying not to die here, bro. Can you ease up? And as soon as they go back and reduce the number of sets, maybe to something like 15 working sets per muscle per week, then all of a sudden they're having the time of their lives gaining a crap load of muscle. So between MEV and MRV is critical, because that's where all the gains happen. If you're below minimum effective volume in your total weekly volume, or if you're above maximum recoverable, you're training all right, but you're kind of going nowhere. And so that doesn't really count towards your natty peak because you're just not on your way to it. Point number 2, you're training between MEV and MRV per muscle group and regularly approaching maximum recoverable volume per muscle, which is often done in specialization phases after like year 5 of training. You could do those, which means what? Some people will be like, yeah, man, I'm kind of gaining everywhere. But that's been good, but like my biceps won't grow. And you're like, okay, how many sets per week do you do for biceps? So like 12 usually. And you're like, okay, check this out. Start at 12 in your next plan. Reduce how much back training and shoulder training you're doing, and just keep cranking biceps. Add a set or 2 every week for like 6 weeks. Are you kidding me? Like, yeah, try. And you're inevitably going to get bigger biceps, because when the systemic MRV isn't capping you out to where you're too tired, it turns out a lot of muscles, their local maximum recoverable volume is really quite high, shown in study after study after study. And so if you don't train ultra hard the rest of your body, just enough to maintain or gain slowly, and just take 1 or 2 muscles at a time, really just turn up the set numbers per week, deload, then week and week deload. If you do that, then all of a sudden you're going to be training with much higher volumes. You're going to still be recovering at the local level, but you're going to be getting close to and just at MRV every now and again. You're really pushing it. Then you can find out, okay, did this really work for me? I used to train calves like, once a week with like 3 sets or something like that. And they just stopped growing. And then I was like, you know what? Well, I'm going to train my calves like I train everything else. So I trained them twice a week with like, if you adjust for all the factors, kind of like 6 to 8 sets per session on average. My calves grew for years. Friggin' fudging years. Not supposed to be saying the F word anymore on this channel, Scott says. So I'm just going to say fudge. I'm going to fudge you guys to death and fudge you how you like it. I'm going to fudge you till you love me. Other F word Mike Tyson used in that one quote. Remember, Scott, when Mike was being mean? Yeah. So definitely consider that per any given muscle group, if you haven't cranked the volume slowly but surely on it before to where you just exhaust that muscle group and it fails to recover on its own, you really haven't hit your natty peak on that muscle. And if you sort of raise every muscle up every now and again and raise it up and raise it up and raise it up, you get closer to your natty full body peak. But you have to do specialization phases to get there, because no one at the very cream of the crop top of their career has enough systemic recovery ability to push every muscle to the limit and beyond to its local MRV. The sum of all local muscle maximum recovery volumes is greater in total fatigue than your systemic volume. Is just how it works. Number 3. You got to push your relative efforts from 3 reps in reserve, roughly, to 0 reps in reserve, roughly, which means that if you haven't really pushed close to failure, and even if that just means you get to 3 reps from failure, if you're always at 5 or 6 reps from failure, like the meme about me, which is half true and 75% true, but it's really 100% true. I really don't train hard enough. So anytime you hear me bitching about my natural peak, that's nonsense. Now, when I got my natural peak, well, it's nonsense for 2 reasons now. When I got my natural peak, I was almost the entire time I trained up to my natty peak, I did every single work set to complete concentric failure. I stopped doing that because it's a dumbass way to train. In my context, it was. Some people it works, but for the most part, it's not ideal. But at least I was pushing really hard. And now I'm pushing pretty hard. But if you see someone train who like, they do a curl and they put it down, they're like, I'm good. And they're like, yeah, I hit my natty peak. You're like, bro, stop. On the other hand, if you see someone just cranking all kinds of assisted reps and forced reps and partials, cooking themselves, you got to ask the question of like, you might be doing a bit too much. And if you backed off a little bit and got some good progressions going with some 2RIR training, you might make some awesome gains, put some strength on you, put some muscle on you. It works on both ends of the spectrum. But underdoing it is more often the culprit than overdoing it, unless you're a gym bro, and then overdoing it is probably a realistic concern. Next, in order to say you did a good job and really hit your natty peak, you have to spend a lot of time focusing on muscle targeting techniques and deep ranges of motion and updating and enhancing your techniques regularly. So if someone says, I can't grow my legs anymore, but I watch them squat and it's a quarter of the way down, I'm going to be like, bro, stop. You're not even squatting. Take those 4 plates off the bar, replace them with 2 plates, teach you how to do a proper weightlifting style squat. You do 5 by 12 in that. I'll never see you again because you're never going to walk again, but you're going to be jacked. Who needs to walk when you have huge legs? They just kind of like infer that you can walk really well. You just pull up your quads and people are like, oh, I'll just take you wherever you need to go because you're now our great king with huge quads. And so a lot of times people will hit their natty peak, but you watch them quote unquote natty peak and you watch them train and you're like, who taught you how to train? Did you like grow up with orangutans in the zoo that like they saw a video about weightlifting once from the 1920s and they showed you some stuff and that's all you learned? Just heaving and hoeing and moving weight around. If you really want muscles to grow, you got to get specific. You got to get really good technique, get that deep stretch, push the weights hard, get the proper ranges of motion, the proper arcs. Like some people are trying to grow their lats by pulling down and their elbows come up, but actually lats engage when your elbows pull down. So there's all kinds of stuff. Before you say, man, I'm not gaining any more on this muscle, make sure you're using fundamentally good technique. You don't need crazy tips and tricks and special stuff. Fundamentally good technique that focuses on the target muscle instead of just like total nonsense where someone watching you train is like, that person has actually never really trained a day in their life. Number 5 is, this one is critical. Experiment with different splits and different exercises in different reps in reserve, and narrow down what works best for you. Have you tried lower volume, higher intensity training ever? You should. Have you tried very high volume scaled training that's maybe 1 rep in reserve at the end of a mesocycle? You should. Have you tried doing push legs pull? You should. Upper lower? You should. Complex split? Absolutely you should. 2-a-days? You should try it at some point. Before you really say you reach your natty peak, you got to try a bunch of different stuff. Why? Because people are built differently. And sometimes what works really well for one person doesn't work ideally for another. And sometimes you're doing something and it works really well and then it kind of stops working so well. And if you switch to something else, turns out, oh my God, that actually works really great. And you never can tell what's quote unquote ideal for you until you try a bunch of different stuff. There is not a one size fits all approach to training. I get some crap every now and again for like, oh, like Mike just espouses his program or his style or his methods. What the f are my methods? It took me a whole goddamn book to explain this shit. My methods are just parameters. Consider your volume, consider your intensity, consider your technique, see how those factors interact. The number of programs that you can lay out is so many that we had to make the RP Hypertrophy app to show them all. That's not even all. It's just the ones we made randomly. And there's like a couple hundred on there and you can make your own and your own are going to be awesome. So don't ever get constrained to one way of doing things. I've done so many different kinds of programs in my life and continue to experiment all the time. Because you never can tell when you're going to be like, dude, I never did this one program before, this exercise before. Or I never really tried pushing so close to failure or did reps in reserve before. But like, damn, this shit hits and I've got new gains. You don't want to be a clown and say like, yeah, man, I hit the natty peak. And someone's like, you ever tried this kind of workout? And you're like, no, but probably wouldn't work for me. Okay, you can see into the future. Dope. You try it, maybe it won't work. But a lot of times it will. So it's just a matter of being very thorough, making sure to really look, have I done everything I could? Point number 6 is getting good nutrition. Enough protein, enough calories to gain, and mostly healthy foods. If you check those 3 boxes of good nutrition, you're getting 90+ % of your gains anyway. A lot of people will say, I hit my natty peak, but then you like hang out with them and you watch them train and you watch them eat and you're like, bro, you're not even trying. On the other hand, if you've been crushing a bodybuilding diet out for multiple years, gaining good weight, but now you're starting to have trouble with muscle gain, yeah, this is probably not your diet. So you have to have a good diet. Number 7 is getting good sleep in both duration and quality. There's lots of people that'll think they'll hit their natty limit and then like they're no longer sleep constrained because their kids grow up or something like that or start sleeping through the night. And they're like, dude, I'm in a revolution of gains. I don't know what happened. I'm like, you're sleeping again. They're like, right, okay, that makes a ton of sense. And lastly, and this one's big, I've seen this sneak up on a bunch of people, is getting proper stress management. School, work, relationships. There are people in grad school that have another job that are in like an infinite breakup with their girlfriend all the time and their gains suck. And after a while, you know, the first 5 years they had it great and then they hit grad school and everything goes to hell and they're like, yeah, man, natty peak. And it's like, why don't you get your life sorted out? So what do? They drop out of grad school. They dump their girlfriend finally and they don't work anymore. And so they collect welfare and just get massive. Scott, new program, welfare gains. That's it. JK, but if you reduce some of your stressors, sometimes people have like a really nasty internship at work. They keep you awake at night, they tie you up, all kinds of strange things. You're on camera a lot, you're passed out most of the time, typical internship at RP YouTube department. And so if you're in that situation, gains are going to be tough. But then when the situation settles and you can get good sleep, your stress management is awesome, then you're going to be at a place where you can gain a lot more. Sometimes that's realistic. Sometimes it's not. But if it can be realistic for you, try it because it can make a huge difference. And if you get every single one of these right, but you get sleep wrong and you get proper stress management wrong, you could have zero gains where you could otherwise have amazing gains that you would be like, dude, I'm for sure not at my natty limit. All right. So all this taken together, we can funnel it down into kind of a little shit test for the peak. Are you really close to your natty peak? You have no idea how many people I've interacted with that have assumed they were at their natty peak, but had major holes in these 8 preconditions of good training, good eating, and all these different details. They just never put in a good enough effort and they didn't know. The best shit test for your peak is if you optimize these conditions for 4 to 6 months. 4 to 6 months. Give me minimum 4 months where you are doing the following. Training between your MEV and MRV. Making sure if you have muscles that you really want to work on, you're specializing. Pushing relative efforts hard, 3 to 0 RIR regularly, somewhere in that range. Focusing on really good exercises, really good techniques. If Jared Feather can stand in the corner and nod at your exercise technique, you're good to go. If Nick Walker can say you're doing a good job, you're good to go. If the gym bro in your gym who bounces the bar on his belly and then a quarter of the way up and down tells you have amazing technique and it's just like his, you have a problem. If you experiment with a bunch of different splits, try something new, try something advanced, you're training 5 days a week, 1.5 hours at a time, but you're getting amazing nutrition, awesome sleep, good stress management, and you're making progress in your strength. If you can do that for 4 to 6 months, do you see a robust change in gains and in your rep strength? If the answer is like, dude, I am kind of a low-key different person now, like visibly bigger, pecs, my arms feel fuller, my exercises are just like 20 pounds more strength than they were before this 5-month period, you're not at your natty peak, man, and you might be quite far off. But if it's really quite similar and you're like, I gained a little bit, I think, or I gained a little bit for sure, but it's not a ton, even though it was a really full send effort, yeah, you're probably close to your natty peak. That's really kind of the ultimate way to tell. And it's really kind of straightforward. This like, what's a good, pat myself on the back, classic Mike analogy that makes no goddamn sense. If someone's like, I haven't had a lot of success with dating. And like, okay, so what's dating to you? Like, well, I just show up in my sweatshirt. I typically don't brush my teeth and I'm kind of an antagonistic person. So I just make fun of the girl until she cries and leaves. You're like, man, you really haven't tried proper dating, which means what? Scott, describe what a man gets ready for a proper date. How does he do it?
What do you mean? Like how he prepares his body?
Body, outfit, location. How are we going to interact with these hoes out here? You feel me?
I can't get a note. It's too many details.
It's so many details.
It could be a whole video.
God knows how to do it right. And that's a video I'm so unqualified for. I'll never make it. Or I'll make it, it'll be a giant clown show. But like legit, to finish the analogy, get a haircut, brush your teeth, read the mystery method or some shit like that before you go. Don't just do that right before you go. It'll make no sense. Look to have an engaging attitude, go to a nice place, put on some nice clothes, be kind, do a little humor in there, wink a bunch, 2-eye wink, do like my whatever Tourette's wink I do, it's subconscious. I just do this all the time. Try some shit like that. Maybe you'll stand out. I don't know. Autism's cool nowadays. So if you did that after 8 dates, you still have, completely dry, what. Yeah, man, dating's not for you. Time to hit, Tinder or whatever the hell goes on in there. But if you tell me, yeah, I've been dating and it just doesn't work for me, and I realize you've been literally smearing fecal material on your face and showing up to dates like that, which is the rough equivalent of how some people train technique-wise and think they've hit their natty peak, don't even bother with it, man. You got to do a good job to find out what the hell is going on. All right. So let's say you're peaked, right? I've piqued your interest. What can you do about it? You're close to your natty peak, 5+ pounds away. What can you do? One option is that you can prioritize some muscles while cooling in on others to optimize for aesthetics. That's what I'm doing right now. I've gained the vast majority of the muscle I will in my life, short of like really crazy drug advances in the future, and then it could get really responsible again. But for now, I'm cooled off on total muscle gain. So what have I been doing? I've been almost completely detraining my legs. I train them for mobility. Essentially, I'll tell you exactly my workout. Roughly every 5 days, I do stiff-legged deadlifts with 135 pounds for a set of 10. I do 10 quad extensions, sissy squats, essentially. And then I do 10 lunges with my body weight, literally 10 reps. That entire thing takes me, as measured, like 2 total minutes. I do 2 total minutes of leg training once every 5 days or so. That's how little stimulus my legs get. The rest of the shit. Oh, and I stopped doing a whole lot of bent rowing really heavy because my back thickness is really good, but I could use more width. Now I'm taking all that volume and pouring it into my delts, biceps, triceps, forearms, calves, and upper back and upper chest. I don't do my lower chest a ton anymore because it's plenty big. So even though I'm not going to gain a ton of muscle overall, maybe not much, maybe not at all, what I am going to do is gain a little bit here, lose a little bit there. It's always easy to regain your muscle, so I can always bring my legs back up to what they used to look like. And then my body will be roughly the same size, maybe 5 pounds more muscle in a few years, but like different because my arms are way bigger, shoulders are bigger, upper back is bigger, upper chest is bigger, calves look a little bigger, legs look a little bit more in proportion. And all of a sudden, like it's a cooler look. That's what I'm doing. And it's 100% what you can do if you're close to your natty peak, because once you hit your natty peak, that's for overall total muscle size. That doesn't mean you can't futz with the proportions a little bit and get your body to look substantially better. Because sometimes even if you're lean and muscular, the various muscles on you that are bigger versus smaller, they don't look ideal. And there's always improvement in aesthetics. For one thing, I've never seen anyone whose shoulders, whose side delts were too big. I don't believe I've ever seen that in any single physique. And if you find someone other than synthol people with arms that are too big, good God, I'll come down there myself and make sweet love to their arms because there is no such thing as too big. So you can always focus on aesthetics. What you can also do is if you're like, yeah, okay, that's cool, but I don't want it to be my whole life. What you can do is spend maybe like half the year in chunks or as a whole unit, focusing on aesthetics and getting your best physique and maybe doing a fat loss phase and then going on a cruise or on a kind of beach vacation after to show off the bod, or just go to the club and just rub yourself up on random people. Not random. Scott, how ethical is it to rub yourself on people at like a sweaty dance club?
Oh, it's fine.
Like that's what you're there for, right? You don't need to know them or whatever. Guys, girls, everyone, the staff, I don't care. I'm rubbing up on everyone. The way you know Mike is at the club is you're like, hey, did Mike come in yet? And you look at the bouncer's face and he looks really uncomfortable and has an erection. That means your boy came through there. You feel me? And if I had 5 more minutes with him, he wouldn't have an erection anymore. Just a big ass smile on his face. Isn't that right, fellas? We're getting banned off YouTube. Scott, what do you let me say shit like this for? So you do the aesthetic part, but then the other half of the year, you do maintenance training, which is, again, roughly 1/3 of the total volume, which means that if you typically train 6 days per week, you can now train 2 days per week and maintain all of your muscle, if not almost all of it. And as soon as you're like 3 weeks back into physique training, you regain all the lost muscle and then you start re-architecting your body again. Maintenance training is profoundly easy. And then you can fill the rest of the time with other sports, hobbies, travel, work, school, life, whatever it is that you like. Really balanced life. And then sometimes people see you at the gym like twice a week and you have this amazing body and they're like, what the hell is this guy's secret? Well, I trained for 15 years like a friggin' animal. And then now I train like an animal half the year, but the other half I'm chilling and vibes are great. Turns out maintenance doesn't require you to cook yourself all the time. And the third is not a recommendation of mine. This is a very sensitive topic. You can consider enhancement to take your shit to the other level. That's what I did. And look what I got, balding. And you guys know that, hair actually grows on the top of my nose. Isn't that disgusting, Scott? And recently, hair started growing like real close to my eyes. It legit like Judaism is real, bro.
and laser.
Yeah, Eastern European. You know what, man? People tell me about the laser. I'm like, have you tried to shoot it at Jews? That is not a good sound clip. Let me rephrase. Your boy needs the Iron Dome up on this mouth. Shit serious, fellas. Yeah, Scott. You know, when you read up in the laser, it actually says like can cause permanent skin scarring and, you know, like treatment may not actually work for some people. And you're like, damn it. It's not like a one and done thing, you know? Plus apparently you need like many treatments and many of some of my friends that have done it. They're like, whatever people tell you about it, it's insanely painful.
Yeah, it gets more painful because they got to keep cranking it up as the hair goes away. You know? It gets harder.
Yeah. It's the only way I'll know what it's like to get harder. Yeah, no laser for me. But in any case, all that aside, enhancement's cool. It's dope. It works. It's really bad for your health. It's getting better with all the good knowledge we have and the better drugs coming out. But if it's legal in your jurisdiction, if you're not using it to cheat at sport, if you really chewed the idea down to the bone, you have coaches and medical professionals at your side, you can consistently choose the enhanced route for some question mark of relatively awesome or relatively highly traded off things. That's the deal, fellas. Enjoy training. I hope you enjoy this video. Get the Natty Peak going. If you need help training, organizing the structure, tracking the structure, tons of different plans included for all one simple price. The hypertrophy app, RP Hypertrophy app, is available. Link in our description. And if you want the diet to go with it, because I say a lot of stuff in this video about how like dieting matters, eating well matters, the RP Diet Coach app is also linked in the description. Check that out. You get these two apps together. The only thing you need to drop in there, well, two things. One is your willpower. And the other one is avoiding toxic women in your life, because them bitches will steal every gain that you have. But I'd know nothing about that, would I? Nor would anyone else associated with the RP channel, specifically someone named. See you guys next time.